Wholeness is one of the most underestimated and misunderstood aspects of human connection, especially when it comes to love. At its core, wholeness is about embracing ourselves fully in all our strengths and vulnerabilities and bringing that same authenticity into our relationships. It is the foundation upon which meaningful and fulfilling connections are built. And yet, so many of us settle for relationships that fall short of this ideal. We accept half love, a love that is fragmented, conditional, and afraid of depth, because we often fail to recognize the profound power of wholeness in shaping our lives and our capacity to love and be loved. The power of wholeness begins within. Before we can seek or expect wholeness in our relationships, we must first cultivate it in ourselves. This means coming to terms with every aspect of who we are, the good, the bad, the messy, and the magical. It's about owning our stories, even the parts we'd rather hide, and understanding that those stories don't define our worth, but instead make us beautifully human. When we refuse to acknowledge these parts of ourselves, we create internal gaps, pieces of ourselves that we refuse to claim. These gaps show up in our relationships, leaving us unable to give or receive love fully. Think about it. How can we expect someone else to love us wholly if we don't first do that for ourselves? Wholeness is a practice of radical self-acceptance. It's waking up every day and choosing to love the person in the mirror, not just when they achieve something or look a certain way, but simply because they exist. It's understanding that we are inherently worthy of love, not because of what we do, but because of who we are. When we embrace this truth, we step into our relationships from a place of confidence and clarity, not from a place of lack or fear. But wholeness isn't just about self-love, it's also about how we show up in our relationships. When we are whole, we bring our full selves to the table, our passions, our dreams, our fears, and our flaws. We don't hold back or hide parts of who we are in an attempt to be more acceptable or likable. Instead, we trust that the right people will love us for who we truly are, not for the mask we might be tempted to wear. This kind of authenticity creates a space for deeper intimacy and connection, as it encourages others to do the same. Wholeness invites wholeness. On the other hand, when we approach relationships from a place of incompleteness, we end up looking to others to fill the gaps within us. This is a dangerous dynamic because no one else can complete us. When we rely on someone else to give us what we lack in ourselves, we place an unfair burden on them, a burden they will inevitably fail to carry. This creates a cycle of disappointment, frustration, and resentment. Let's move on to our last question. Half love arises when one or both people in a relationship are not whole. It's the love that comes from insecurity, fear, and the unwillingness to face ourselves fully. Wholeness is also about courage. It takes immense bravery to show up fully in a relationship. To love someone with your whole heart means risking heartbreak. It means being vulnerable enough to let someone see the parts of you that you're not proud of. It means standing in the discomfort of conflict and working through it instead of running away. Half love, on the other hand, is afraid. It avoids difficult conversations, shies away from commitment, and keeps one foot out the door just in case. It's love that is more concerned with self-protection than connection. The power of wholeness lies in its ability to transform not just our relationships, but also our lives. When we live from a place of wholeness, we stop seeking validation from external sources. We no longer look to our partners, friends, or society to tell us we are enough. Instead, we carry that truth within us. This inner strength allows us to set healthy boundaries and walk away from relationships that do not honor our value. It empowers us to demand more, not in a way that is entitled, but in a way that is grounded in self-respect, in Wholeness also allows us to love others more deeply. When we are whole, we no longer approach love from a place of neediness or desperation. We don't cling to others out of fear of being alone, nor do we use love as a way to escape from ourselves. Instead, we love from a place of abundance. We are able to give freely without losing ourselves in the process. We are able to celebrate our partner's individuality without feeling threatened. And we are able to navigate challenges with a sense of resilience and grace. Wholeness is not perfection. It does not mean having it all figured out or never making mistakes. Instead, it is about embracing our humanity and recognizing that we are a work in progress. It is about being honest with ourselves and others, even when it's uncomfortable. It is about choosing growth over comfort and connection over fear. Wholeness is not something we achieve once and for all. It is a lifelong journey, a continuous practice of showing up for ourselves and for the people we love. When we experience the power of wholeness, we begin to understand that half love will never be enough. We realize that we deserve more depth, more commitment, more authenticity, and just as importantly, we realize that we are capable of giving more. Half love is one of the most insidious forms of heartache. At first glance, it might not even look like pain at all. It comes dressed in promises, fleeting moments of connection, and whispers of possibility. But the reality of half love is far from romantic. It's the slow ache of uncertainty, the lingering doubt of whether you are enough, and the exhaustion of carrying a relationship that never fully arrives. Half love is the kind of pain that seeps in slowly, disguised as hope, until it consumes your sense of self and leaves you questioning everything. What makes half love so uniquely painful is its inconsistency. It gives just enough to keep you invested, but never enough to make you feel secure. One day they're fully present, showering you with attention and affection, making you believe that this could be the real thing. The next day they're distant, aloof, and hard to reach. You find yourself caught in a cycle of highs and lows, clinging to the good moments while trying to survive the bad ones. This roller coaster of emotions is not love. It's emotional whiplash. And the longer you stay on the ride, the more disoriented you become. Half love often feels like walking a tightrope. You're constantly trying to balance your emotions, careful not to ask for too much or express too much vulnerability. You may find yourself tiptoeing around their moods, afraid that if you push too hard or demand too much, they'll pull away entirely. This fear keeps you trapped, convincing you to accept crumbs of affection when what you truly need is a feast. Half love convinces you that you should be grateful for whatever small pieces they're willing to give, even if those pieces leave you starving for more. The pain of half love is not always loud. It's not the kind of heartbreak that comes from a sudden betrayal or a dramatic ending. Instead, it's a quiet, persistent ache that gnaws at your heart. It's the feeling of waiting for a text that never comes, or longing for a conversation that never happens. It's lying awake at night wondering why they can't seem to love you the way you love them. This kind of pain is subtle, but it's no less damaging. It erodes your self-worth little by little, leaving you with the nagging belief that you are somehow not enough. One of the cruelest aspects of half love is the illusion it creates. Because it offers glimpses of what love could be, it keeps you holding on, hoping that things will get better. You tell yourself that if you just try harder or give it more time, they'll come around. You focus on their potential rather than their reality, believing that the love you want is just around the corner. But half love rarely turns into whole love. More often than not, it leaves you chasing something that doesn't exist, pouring your energy into someone who is unwilling or unable to meet you where you are. The pain of half love is compounded by the fact that it often makes you doubt yourself. You start to question your instincts, wondering if you're overreacting or expecting too much. After all, they do show up sometimes, don't they? They do say they care about you, even if their actions don't always align. This inconsistency creates confusion, making it difficult to trust your own feelings. And the more you assume that, the harder you press to disassociate and go within yourself. You may even find yourself blaming yourself for the gaps in the relationship, convinced that if you were different, more patient, more understanding, more lovable, they would finally give you the love you deserve. Half love is not just painful, it's exhausting. It demands a tremendous amount of emotional labor as you constantly try to bridge the gap between what you need and what they're willing to give. You spend countless hours analyzing their words and actions, trying to decipher their true feelings. You pour your energy into keeping the relationship afloat, often at the expense of your own well-being. This kind of love takes and takes, leaving you drained and depleted. And yet, because you've invested so much, walking away feels almost impossible. Another layer of pain in half love comes from the lack of reciprocity. True love is a two-way street, a mutual exchange of care, support, and commitment. But in half love, one person is always giving more, while the other takes without fully investing. This imbalance creates resentment, even if it's unspoken. You may find yourself feeling unappreciated and undervalued, yet unable to articulate those feelings because you fear pushing them away. The pain of giving your all to someone who only gives you half is one of the deepest forms of heartache. Half love also keeps you in a state of limbo. It's neither here nor there, not a committed partnership, but not entirely absent either. This ambiguity can be maddening, as it leaves you without a clear sense of where you stand. You're not free to move on, but you're also not grounded in the security of a full committed relationship. This in-between space is emotionally taxing, as it forces you to live with constant uncertainty. It's like trying to build a house on shifting sand. No matter how much effort you put in, the foundation is never solid. Perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of half love is its ability to make you feel alone, even when you're with someone. Love is supposed to be a source of connection and intimacy, a place where you feel seen and valued. But half love often leaves you feeling more isolated than ever. You may find yourself longing for a deeper connection, only to be met with indifference or avoidance. This sense of loneliness can be devastating, as it highlights the gap between what you have and what you truly want. The courage to demand more is not about arrogance or entitlement. It's about recognizing your worth and refusing to settle for less than you deserve. It's about standing firmly in your truth and understanding that love, relationships, and connection should be a source of joy, growth, and support, not a place where you constantly compromise your needs or shrink yourself to fit into someone else's world. But demanding more takes bravery. It's not always easy to ask for what you need, especially in a society that often encourages us to prioritize others' comfort over our own desires. Demanding more begins with self-awareness. It requires a deep understanding of who you are, what you value, and what you need to thrive. For many of us, this clarity doesn't come naturally. We've been conditioned to believe that wanting more, whether it's more love, more respect, or more effort, makes us too much. We've internalized messages that tell us to be grateful for what we have, even if what we have leaves us feeling empty. This conditioning makes it difficult to identify when our needs aren't being met, let alone to voice those needs aloud. The first step in finding the courage to demand more is breaking free from the fear of rejection. Many people stay in relationships, friendships, or situations that don't serve them because they're afraid of what will happen if they ask for more. They fear being seen as demanding or difficult. They worry that if they set boundaries or express dissatisfaction, the other person will walk away. This fear keeps us trapped in cycles of complacency where we tolerate less than ideal circumstances simply because they feel safer than the unknown. But here's the truth. Staying silent about your needs doesn't make them disappear. It only buries them beneath layers of frustration and resentment, which eventually bubble to the surface in unhealthy ways. The courage to demand more means facing the possibility of rejection head on. It means saying, I deserve better and I'm willing to risk discomfort to honor myself. Rejection is painful, but it's not the end. In fact, it often paves the way for better opportunities, relationships, and connections. Ones that align with your true self. Demanding more also requires letting go of the fear of being too much. Many of us, especially women, have been taught to minimize ourselves to be likable. We're told not to be too emotional, too opinionated, or too needy. This cultural narrative convinces us that we should be satisfied with the bare minimum, that asking for more is a sign of selfishness rather than self-respect. But the reality is that asking for what you need isn't selfish, it's necessary. You cannot build meaningful, fulfilling relationships without clear communication about what matters to you. The courage to demand more also comes with the responsibility to know what more means for you. It's not about being unrealistic or expecting perfection. It's about identifying what truly matters to you in a relationship or situation. What are your non-negotiables? What are the values you hold dear? What kind of effort, care, and attention makes you feel loved and valued? When you have a clear sense of these things, it becomes easier to articulate your needs and to recognize when they're not being met. Demanding more is not just about relationships with others, it's also about the relationship you have with yourself. Too often, we seek external validation or fulfillment to compensate for what we lack internally. We stay in half-hearted relationships because we're afraid of being alone. We settle for jobs that don't excite us because we doubt our ability to succeed elsewhere. We tolerate friendships that drain us because we fear confrontation. The courage to demand more starts with believing that you are inherently worthy of good things, without needing anyone else to prove it to you. This kind of courage doesn't develop overnight. It's a process of unlearning the stories you've been told about what you deserve and rewriting those narratives with ones that empower you. It requires self-compassion and patience, as well as a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths about why you've accepted less in the past. Perhaps you've stayed in relationships because you were afraid of being alone. Perhaps you've downplayed your needs because you didn't want to seem demanding. Whatever the reason, it's important to acknowledge it without judgment and use that awareness to move forward. The act of demanding more is also deeply tied to boundaries. Boundaries are a way of saying, this is what I need to feel safe, respected, and valued. They're not about controlling others, they're about protecting your own well-being. Setting boundaries can feel intimidating, especially if you're not used to asserting yourself, but boundaries are an essential part of demanding more. They create a framework for what you will and will not tolerate. They send a clear message that your needs matter and that you are willing to uphold them, even if it means facing pushback. One of the hardest parts of demanding more is dealing with the guilt that often comes with it. Many of us feel guilty for wanting more, as if our desires are a burden to others. We worry that asking for better treatment will make us seem ungrateful or difficult. But this guilt is often misplaced. It's not selfish to want to be treated with respect and care. It's a basic human need. Overcoming this guilt requires reframing the way you think about your needs. Instead of viewing them as burdens, recognize them as opportunities for deeper connection and mutual understanding. Demanding more also means being willing to walk away when your needs aren't met. This is perhaps the ultimate act of courage, knowing when to let go. It's not easy to leave a relationship or a situation, especially if you've invested time, energy, and emotion into it. But staying in a place where you're not valued does more harm than good. Walking away isn't about giving up. It's about choosing yourself. It's about taking risks and solely believing that you can do something without expecting a response. It's about creating space for something better to come into your life, even if that space feels uncomfortable or uncertain at first. Wholeness is not something we find outside ourselves. It is something we cultivate from within. It is a state of being where we accept, embrace, and integrate every aspect of who we are, our strengths, our weaknesses, our triumphs, and our failures. Wholeness is not perfection. It's not about having all the answers or living a life free of mistakes. Rather, it's about living authentically, grounded in self-awareness and self-compassion. It is a journey, not a destination, and it requires us to do the deep, often uncomfortable work of looking inward. The journey to wholeness starts with self-acceptance. This means acknowledging every part of ourselves, even the parts we might wish to hide or change. Society often teaches us to focus on our shortcomings, to compare ourselves to others, and to strive for an ideal that is neither realistic nor attainable. This constant pursuit of better leaves us feeling fragmented, as though we must reject certain parts of ourselves to be worthy of love and acceptance. But true wholeness begins when we stop trying to fit into molds that were never made for us, and instead honor the unique individuals we are. Self-acceptance doesn't mean settling or refusing to grow. It means recognizing that growth begins with seeing ourselves clearly, without judgment. It's about saying, this is who I am right now, and that's enough. From this place of acceptance, we can begin to make choices that align with our values and desires, rather than trying to live up to external expectations. Wholeness asks us to let go of the idea that we need to be fixed and instead focus on the richness and complexity of our humanity. Another critical component of wholeness is self-awareness. To be whole, we must be willing to explore the depths of who we are, even when it's uncomfortable. This means taking an honest look at our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors and asking ourselves why we do what we do. It's about identifying patterns that no longer serve us and learning how to shift them. Self-awareness is not about self-criticism. It's about curiosity. It's about approaching ourselves with the same compassion and understanding we would offer a dear friend. Wholeness also requires us to confront our fears and insecurities. These are often the parts of ourselves we try hardest to avoid, yet they hold the key to our growth. Fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of not being enough. These are universal human experiences, but they don't have to define us. When we face our fears head on, we begin to see that they are not as insurmountable as they seem. To step back and say, we learn that we are capable of enduring discomfort, and that our worth is not tied to our ability to avoid mistakes or setbacks. One of the most powerful aspects of cultivating wholeness is learning to embrace vulnerability. In a world that often equates vulnerability with weakness, choosing to be open and authentic is an act of courage. Vulnerability is the willingness to show up as we are without pretense or armor. It's about sharing our joys, our struggles, and our dreams, even when there's no guarantee of how they will be received. Vulnerability is the bridge that connects us to others, but is also the pathway to connecting more deeply with ourselves. Self-compassion is another cornerstone of wholeness. Too often we are our own harshest critics, holding ourselves to impossible standards and berating ourselves when we fall short. But wholeness is not about being perfect. It's about being kind to ourselves, especially when things don't go as planned. Self-compassion means treating ourselves with the same gentleness and understanding we would offer someone we love. It means recognizing that mistakes are not failures, but opportunities to learn and grow. When we cultivate self-compassion, we create a safe and nurturing environment within ourselves, allowing us to thrive. Wholeness also invites us to reconnect with our inner wisdom. In the busyness of daily life, it's easy to lose touch with our intuition and inner voice. We become so focused on meeting external demands and expectations that we forget to listen to what we truly need and want. Wholeness asks us to slow down, to quiet the noise, and to tune into the guidance within us. This inner wisdom is always there, but it requires stillness and presence to access. When we learn to trust ourselves, we begin to make decisions that are aligned with our values and desires rather than being driven by fear or obligation. An essential aspect of wholeness is learning to integrate the different parts of ourselves. We all have parts of our identity that feel at odds with each other. The part of us that wants stability versus the part that craves adventure, the part that seeks connection versus the part that values independence. Wholeness is not about choosing one over the other. It's about finding a way to honor and integrate all of these parts. It's about recognizing that we are multifaceted beings and that our complexity is a source of strength, not a weakness. Wholeness also asks us to let go of the need for external validation. It's natural to want approval and acceptance from others, but when our sense of worth is tied to external opinions, we give away our power. Wholeness means finding that sense of worthiness within ourselves, independent of what others think. It's about recognizing that we are enough, just as we are, and that our value is not determined by anyone else's judgment. The journey to wholeness is not a linear process. It's a lifelong practice, one that requires patience, courage, and resilience. There will be moments when we feel fragmented, when self-doubt creeps in, and when the temptation to seek wholeness outside ourselves feels overwhelming. But each time we choose to turn inward, to embrace our imperfections, to honor our truth, and to show ourselves compassion, we take another step toward living a life that is authentic, fulfilling, and whole.